Hello to all our life groups here at Gateway Church, fall of 2023. I hope you are encouraging each other in the Lord and getting to know each other. Here we're starting this new season together as a life group. Use these first couple weeks to make sure you get to know each other's names, share a little bit about your story and what brings you here to the church and to this life group that you're participating in. I hope that this fall, as you connect as a group, that this could be a real great community for you in your days and years ahead as part of our church family. This fall, together in our life groups, we are having each week an opportunity to reflect on our topic that we've discussed that Sunday in our messages. We started a new series this past Sunday. We're calling it The Bible Doesn't Say That, talking about all those cliches, all those phrases, all those lines that we throw around oftentimes with very good intentions, oftentimes with the desire to encourage people and even maybe inspire them to do the right thing. But how these cliches that in the end, they may be teaching us very unbiblical things. And in the end, not leading us to the life that God truly would have for us if we allow these kinds of postcard, coffee mug type of lines to guide and direct our spiritual life. We want to go deeper than that. We want to understand the scriptural basis for what we say and making sure that it's aligned with what is true and good and ultimately life-giving for us as a follower of God. And so today this last week, we started off with the first phrase, one that you hear tossed around in Christian circles and in other circles as well. Follow your heart. Follow your heart. And listen, on one end, what we're going to see with all of these cliches and phrases is that there's always a little bit, a kernel of truth within it, something that we really want to celebrate and even something that we want to admit is true in the world. And this is the case when we talk about following our heart, because the heart, as we know, is capable of some amazing things. In fact, the scriptures teach this. The scriptures in Ecclesiastes reminds us that eternity is placed in our hearts, that there is even this longing for something more that is within us, that the scriptures as well teach us that our hearts, they could be a center of great joy and happiness and fulfillment, that our heart as well is a place of great strength in our lives, that emotionally there's much that's good that comes from it, that volitionally, that our heart, that it can have purpose, that our heart as well is something that can keep us steadfast and faithful, that our heart as well is something that can be pure and single-minded, as James reminds us, that it's something that can be loving towards God, as Mark 12 reminds us, that the heart has such a capacity for goodness. When we talk about our heart, we're talking about the totality of our inner self, that hidden core of our being, who we are. This is the scriptural way that the heart is discussed. It is as well referenced in its physical sense, but not understanding it in the way that we do in the 21st century scientifically. But the idea that there is some importance to the physicality of the heart and keeping us alive. But the scriptures are much more concerned with its relational and emotional and its volitional importance in our life. So there's a lot of good that comes from our heart. We are created in the image of God with the ability to reflect his glory and image in this world. And part of that is the heart that he has given us. It has eternity within it. It has the capacity for so many good. However, what we find the scriptures teach is that the heart at its core is divided. That the heart, while emotionally it could love and show gladness, it is as well a place of hatred and jealousy and anger. James 3:14 and Deuteronomy 19:6 and other places remind us. It's also a place where we can volitionally purpose to do things that are honoring to God. As well, we can contrive evil, as Acts chapter 5 reminds us, that there is the ability for our heart to be divided towards the wrong things. That morally our hearts can be hardened. Our hearts can be insensitive, that our hearts could be lustful, as Matthew 5:28 tells us, arrogant, as Isaiah 9:9 reminds us, impious, as Acts 7:51 teaches us, and impenitent, as Romans 2:5 says as well, that our own heart can even morally stray in such long ways. In fact, we know ultimately, as it says in Jeremiah 17:9, that our heart can be deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? That our heart is not always a trustworthy moral compass in our lives. That our hearts, while having the capacity for so much good, as well as divided, and has the capacity for great evil. And so, following our hearts sometimes might lead us in making good and right decisions, but oftentimes it doesn't. In fact, one of the most popular coffee mug verses of all time, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, reminds us that following our heart is not the complete answer. Those scriptures remind us to trust in the Lord with all our heart and to not lean on our own understanding, to acknowledge him in all our ways, and then he'll set our path straight. That we need to be mindful that our hearts need something more than just to be followed without thought. And so what do the scriptures teach? Well, there's so much the scriptures teach about how we are to treat our heart. But if I could summarize it this way, I'd say it this way, that we are not to follow our heart. Rather, we are to lead our heart, to incline our heart, to open our heart, to direct our hearts towards knowing God and following him. Towards knowing God and following him. In fact, Psalm 119, 36 reminds us of the importance of doing just this. He says, turn your heart to your decrees. Lord, turn my heart to your truth. That part of the prayer for the follower of the Lord is that our heart might be turned to him. We know that this is a work that the Spirit of God, through the power of God, has to happen in our life, to give us a desire and inclination to have it led towards the Lord and his ways and his purposes. That ultimately we need him to change us. And in fact, this is what the new covenant promise is all about. We read about it in Jeremiah chapter 31, as well as in Ezekiel, this idea that our hearts need to be changed from the inside out and that it's God who does it. In fact, in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, this new covenant is talked about as something that exceeds the old because it reminds us of the work that God has to do. It says in chapter 8, verse 8 of Hebrews that I will make a new covenant with them. Not like the covenant with their ancestors, talking about Israel. Later on, he says, I will put my law into their minds and write them in their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. That God says he's the one that ultimately has to work in our lives to change us from the inside out. And that when we incline our heart, lead our heart, open our heart daily to knowing God and following him, that he'll change us from the inside out. The Psalms talk about this. Lord, create in me a clean heart. Lord, I incline my heart to you. Change me from the inside out. When we find ourselves in decision-making moments, we need to ask in those moments, Lord, incline my heart to what is true and right. Lord, lead me in the ways that are righteous and good. Lord, go before me and show me. We can't always trust what our heart will say. We need help. We need the Lord to help us. What we're reminded of as well in Romans is that as followers of the Lord, Romans chapter 5, that when our hope is in Jesus, our trust has been placed in him, that he does not disappoint. He says this in verse 5 of chapter 5 of Romans, Paul does. This hope will not disappoint us because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who was given to us. That God pours out his love into our hearts through the Spirit of God. He gives us that new covenant heart. And we need to incline our hearts, lead our hearts towards knowing him and following him more faithfully all the time. To not just trust our heart. It could be deceitful. It could be deceived itself. It could be wicked in moments. It could be prone to anger and jealousy and lust. The scriptures remind us that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. We think of some of those things that we have said, that we've allowed to take harbor within our hearts. So we need help. We need help from the outside. We need the power of God through the Spirit of God because of the grace and mercy and the sacrifice of God, his Son, Jesus Christ, to find forgiveness and cleansing so that we could orient our mind and decisions after him. So, first of all, has your heart been changed by God? Have you trusted in him and received the love of God and the Spirit of God in your life? If so, continually lead your heart in the ways of righteousness, in following after God and knowing him in your life. A scripture to close as we end this time of meditation, as you get ready to discuss it with your group. It's found in Luke chapter 12, talking about the anxieties that we often face in this world and the hope and help we need from God. We're reminded that we could worry about all the supplies that we need, all the things that we need, all the money and help that we need to make it in this world, but that how all of these things will grow old and fall away. That there is, however, offered for us an inexhaustible treasure in heaven. And we're reminded in Luke chapter 12, verse 33, make money bags for yourselves that won't grow old, an inexhaustible treasure in heaven, where no thief comes and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. We are to incline our hearts, lead our hearts towards God and his kingdom and his ways, and watch how he changes us and reorients us. So in those moments where you're tempted to follow your heart, no, we shouldn't be tempted. We are called to follow Jesus and incline our heart to him. And when we do, he never disappoints, and he'll lead us in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Well, once again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope that you guys in your group now will jump into these questions and explore even more ways where we could lead our hearts to know and follow God.